Please be seated. There is, in the church these days, a movement called open baptism. And it is a movement among a lot of clergy and a lot of churches where they dispense with a lot of the traditional parts of baptism and just call people in and say, whoever wants to get baptized, come on in right now. And they'll sometimes put in the newspapers or online signs saying, on this Sunday, we're going to baptize anybody who comes up, anybody who shows up, just come and be baptized. Now this movement has a lot of criticism. People say, oh, that's making light of the sacrament. It's taking it lightly. It's making it trivial or a curiosity at best. I don't know. I have not done it because I don't know. But I know that the church has taught many bad things over and about baptism over the centuries, and saying to the world, anybody who wants to get baptized is probably not the worst of them. Before we go into that anymore, you might wonder, why is Chuck talking about baptism today? For two reasons in particular. One is because the reading from the Acts of the Apostles speaks right to baptism. And the other is that in 3 weeks on the Feast of Pentecost, we're going to have 3 baptisms, which is very exciting, and I'm loving it. And it kind of speaks to what's happening with all of that. So, open baptism. Should we require people to be members of the congregation? Should we require them to go through all the classes? Or should we simply say, come on in, if you want to be baptized, come and be baptized? What are the reasons for that? What are the arguments for even doing that? Let's take a peek for just a moment at Philip in Acts. This is, in a way, kind of open baptism, at least as it's understood. There is no real preparation. The guy, he meets them that day, and they talk about God, sure, they talk about Jesus. And on that very day, the Ethiopian eunuch says, there's water, let's do it now. And they do it now. There's no 3, I make everybody here come for at least 3 classes, and I make their godparents come, and they have to do these things, and it's long and drawn out, and when I tell them what they have to do, they're like, really? And you should have seen what it was like when my kids were baptized, and my wife said, you're kidding me, I have to come? I said, yeah. Twice. But that's the traditional way we do it. We instruct people. And why? The traditional answer is so they understand what they're doing. So they understand what they're getting into. My late brother-in-law was a Baptist, and we often had discussions about how things were done differently, including baptism. And he opposed infant baptism. He says they don't understand what they're doing. You know, they've got to be older so they get it. And I said, really? Now, you know, he and my sister, they had 3 kids, and they had discussed baptism. And he wanted to wait until the Baptist way. And I said, Brian, how exactly is the Baptist way? And he says, well, you know, they wait until they're inspired by God. And I said, when's that? He says, roughly 1st grade. Tell me a 1st grader gets it a lot more than an infant. If understanding what you were getting into were the most important thing, none of us would ever be baptized. That's like saying understanding what you're getting into when you become a parent is a prerequisite. If we understood what we were about to get into, none of us would be parents. I say this as a parent of an 18-year-old who spent last night visiting the toilet because he had been out in the sun for 12 hours and had a little bit of sun poisoning, which wasn't helped by the junk food he ate all day. Do we really want to get into this? Most of us don't understand it, and we certainly don't know these children we have when we have them. If any of us really understood what it means to even be married, all the give and the take, the hard times, how many of us would have said, oh yeah, I'll do that? We jump into these things because we know they're good, but we don't realize how hard they are. The things we do that are the most important sometimes we have no understanding of at all. So what do we need with baptism? And what do we do with somebody who says, I want to get baptized, let's do it now? First, we need to understand what baptism is. We know there's water, we know all that. But it is first and foremost what? You can say it out loud. Sacrament. A sacrament. Now you know what the next question is. What is a sacrament?
An outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace.
Yes! Woohoo! Yeah. An outward and visible sign of inward and spiritual grace. Exactly. Beautiful. And you can work that down into one word, a sign. It's a sign of grace. Now the next question. What is grace? There's a definition in the Catechism, but I'm going to make it simple. Grace is God acting in your life and you being aware of it. God's acting everywhere, all the time. God is always here, always in our lives. Most of the time, we're not paying attention. But grace is when you get it. You don't have to understand it. None of us really understands God. I don't even understand my family. I don't have to. One of my favorite movies is called A Knight's Tale, about this peasant who becomes a fake knight. He's just faking it. But he happens to fall in love with this noblewoman who falls in love with him. And when it's discovered who he is, he says, now you know who I am. And she says, to know you will take a lifetime, which I'm willing to give. And the point of that is, knowing is not what happens at that first moment. Knowing is a process. It takes forever. Baptism is a process. Let me rephrase that. Baptism is the beginning of a process. Whenever I do baptism classes or the inquirers classes, and we talk about sacraments and how it's a sign, and they sit there and say, I don't get it. Outward and visible sign. What's that mean? I said this. Have you ever kissed anybody? And every time I do premarital counseling, I say, do you remember your first kiss? And there is only one right answer. Of course you remember that first kiss. And what happened in that first kiss? This potential relationship, this thing, all these sort of undercurrents going under here, you're feeling all these emotions, there's no what to do. All of that is building up, and suddenly you're at this moment of, what do we do next? Because if you kiss, that changes the relationship forever. It changes it from this potential thing to we are a couple. And from now on, whatever happens, we have been a couple. We're either going to be a couple till we die, or we'll be an ex-couple. But we have been changed forever. That one little kiss does that. Not because there's magic, but because it is a sign. An outward and visible sign of inward and spiritual, who knows what we want to call that. And I say, baptism is very much like that. You've got this Ethiopian eunuch. And he's trying to figure out what life means. He's trying to figure out where he fits in with God. And Philip miraculously shows up and says, I think I can talk to you about this. The eunuch really couldn't care less about baptism per se. The eunuch cares about his relationship with God. And that's what they talk about. But in their conversation, this understanding, this sense, this desire to be with God is so strong with the inner that he sees the water. They've talked about that. So he says, let's do it now. Because I want to start this journey. I'm in. I want to be part of this family and everything that that means. So, the baptism itself is in a way nothing. It's like a doorway. You can get up to the doorway and then you choose to walk through or not. And once you walk through, you're on a journey. If you don't walk through it, you're not on that journey. Baptism is a moment in time. It's that first kiss. And somebody asked me, well, what about infant baptism then? I mean, how do I do infant baptism? And I always say, well, think about this. If you've ever had a child, and they put that baby in your arms, what is one of the most instinctual things you do? Well, like the very first thing you do, at least every parent I know who's done this, who have talked about it, one of the very first things they do is they kiss that baby. They don't know that baby. They don't understand what they're getting into. But they know they want this child more than anything in the world. And that kiss bonds them forever. That's what a sacrament is. It is a bond. It's just an action. It's just water on the forehead or immersion. It doesn't matter how we do it. It's a sign of outward and spiritual grace. And it's a sign that we don't really have to understand. We do instruction because it's nice to know what we're doing if we can, at least a little bit. And when we have godparents, when we have sponsors, it's nice for them to understand what they're promising because sponsors make promises. And by the way, so do you. So does everybody here. It's important to know what we're getting into as much as we can. But the truth is, for the person getting baptized, the most important thing isn't understanding. That'll come. That'll take a lifetime, but it'll come. God's got all of eternity. It'll come. What's important is the desire. Not the desire to go through some ceremony and have the little cake and everything like that. I don't really care about that. But the desire to know God, to be on that journey with God, to grow in God, to be a disciple, to grow beyond where I am into someone who God not only loves and cherishes, but also can give work to. That God can trust to go out and share that love. That's what we're growing into. So when we get down to this conversation of open baptism, is it really fair? Is it trivializing baptism to say, come on in, I'll baptize anybody who shows up? I will. If there's desire to be a child of God, if there's desire to be in that family, I'm not really worried about the details because I don't think God is. The church has taught a lot of bad things about baptism. You ever hear the one, the baby baptized, unbaptized, they go to hell? God never said that. Do you ever hear the one that says, if you sin after you've been baptized, you'll go to hell? We used to teach that too. And then, of course, there's the whole limbo thing. And then there's the whole, my parents are giving me a hard time because I haven't had the baby baptized yet. What am I going to do? And the church says, I'll just go do it. That's not desire for God. That's desire to get away from fear. It's desire not to get burned, either metaphorically or literally. So if somebody comes to me with a strong desire to know God, even though they don't know God yet, with a strong desire to grow in that, with a strong desire to simply be in the family of God, I'll baptize them. Because whatever we label it, that open doorway that Christ beckons us to come through, that is the doorway to eternal life. And it's always open. Amen.